Damien Roth was the kind of man who commanded a room without saying a word. At only 30 years old, he had taken Roth Industries from a respected business to a corporate giant, expanding its reach across continents and dominating every industry it touched. With sharp blue eyes that seemed to see through anyone and a lean, athletic frame shaped by early morning workouts, Damien was the embodiment of control, precision, and ambition. To the outside world, he was untouchable, a man who had everything: wealth beyond imagination, influence in circles most people could only dream of, and a mind so strategic that even his competitors secretly admired him. Yet behind his perfectly tailored suits and icy demeanor, there was a man haunted by a shadow no one could see, a shadow cast by the family that had raised him. Damien had learned early that family did not always mean love. His childhood was a cold parade of charity galas, boardroom meetings, and lonely birthday parties where his father shook hands with business partners instead of hugging his son. His mother, once vibrant and full of life, had withered into a fragile, silent figure after a devastating betrayal that no one dared mention. When Damien was 25, his father died suddenly during a sailing trip. The death was officially ruled as an accident, but whispers of darker possibilities circulated within the highest circles. His father's death left Damien with not just the weight of an empire, but also a legacy soaked in secrecy. And at the center of that legacy was a letter, locked away in the Roth family vault, with strict instructions that it could only be opened under one condition. Damien had to get married. Not just any marriage would do. It had to be official, public, and enduring for at least 1 year. Only then would the lawyer be authorized to open the letter and reveal the final instructions left by his father. If Damien refused, he would forfeit a portion of the family estate, including the private trusts that safeguarded Roth Industries against hostile takeovers. For most men, the threat of losing millions would have been enough to rush into a marriage of convenience. For Damien, it was not about the money. It was about power, legacy, and something deeper, a gnawing need to uncover the truth that had hung over him for years. But love was not part of the equation. Damien did not believe in love. He had seen what love had done to his mother, how it had destroyed her spirit and turned her into a shell of the woman she once was. Love was weakness, and weakness had no place in Damien Roth's life. So he decided on a different path. If marriage was a condition, then he would fulfill it, like any other business deal. Efficiently, cleanly, without emotion. He needed a wife, but not a real one. He needed someone who would agree to a contract, someone who would not complicate things with feelings or expectations. A fake wife, someone temporary, someone safe. The idea came to him on a sleepless night, staring out the vast windows of his penthouse overlooking the city. He needed someone invisible to the high society, vultures, but believable enough to fool the legal system. A woman with no ties to power, no ambitions to climb into his world, and no intentions of making anything real. What Damien did not expect was how fate would intervene, leading him to a woman who was anything but predictable, a woman who would shatter every rule he had built to protect himself. And it all started with a spilled coffee. Claire Bennett believed in the quiet magic of everyday life. At 26 years old, she had built a world made of second-hand books, late-night writing sessions, and dreams that refused to die even when the world gave her every reason to surrender. Working as an assistant at Whitmore's, a dusty old bookstore tucked between towering office buildings, Claire lived paycheck to paycheck, but her heart was rich with stories and stubborn hope. With long, wavy chestnut hair often tied loosely at the nape of her neck and warm hazel eyes that seemed to hold hidden laughter, Claire had a beauty that was soft rather than striking. She was the kind of person strangers trusted instantly, the kind of person who could calm a crying child or ease the tension in a crowded room with nothing but a smile. Yet behind that smile was a heavy burden. 4 years ago, Claire's life had taken a brutal turn. She had been engaged to her college sweetheart, a man who promised her a life of adventure and love. 2 months before their wedding, he walked away, leaving nothing but a cold text message and a trail of broken dreams. Around the same time, her mother fell gravely ill, and Claire had to abandon her plans for graduate school to care for her. After her mother's passing, the debts mounted faster than Claire could pay them off. Hospital bills, legal fees, rent, groceries, all stacked against her like a relentless wave. She sold everything that held sentimental value, packed her life into 2 suitcases, and moved into a modest apartment above the bookstore. Her days were filled with shelving books, managing inventory, and sneaking moments to write the novel she had started years ago, but never found the courage to finish. Claire never complained. She never allowed bitterness to take root. Life was what it was, unpredictable and unfair at times, but also full of small mercies. A kind customer, a free coffee from the cafe next door, a letter from her best friend reminding her that dreams were still worth chasing. She measured her success not by bank statements, but by the number of pages she wrote, the smiles she shared, and the nights she fell asleep, knowing she had survived another day. One rainy afternoon, Claire stood behind the counter, lost in a worn copy of Jane Austen, when the door chimed and a man in a dark suit stepped inside. She glanced up, expecting another hurried businessman searching for a last-minute gift. Instead, she found herself locking eyes with someone who looked completely out of place. He was tall, sharp, and radiated a kind of controlled power that made the small, cozy bookstore feel suddenly smaller. His gaze was intense, as if he were searching for something or someone. Claire quickly looked away, her heart inexplicably pounding. She had learned not to get involved with men like that, men who lived in a world of boardrooms and backroom deals, a world where people like her were invisible. Still, fate had its own plans. Minutes later, as Claire carried a stack of books across the polished wooden floor, her foot slipped on a wet patch left by a customer's umbrella. The books tumbled from her arms, scattering across the floor. She landed awkwardly, her ankle twisting slightly, a sharp gasp escaping her lips. Before she could even register what was happening, strong arms lifted her gently off the ground. She looked up, and there he was, the man in the dark suit, holding her with surprising care. His blue eyes, so cold at first glance, now held a flicker of something else. Concern. "You should be more careful," he said, his voice low and steady. Claire, flustered and embarrassed, mumbled a quick thank you and tried to step away, but her ankle protested, sending a jolt of pain up her leg. The man frowned, glancing at her foot, then back at her face. "Sit down," he said, not unkindly, guiding her to a nearby chair. She protested, saying she was fine, but he ignored her, disappearing for a moment and returning with a cold bottle of water wrapped in a napkin, pressing it against her swelling ankle with surprising gentleness. Claire watched him, puzzled. Who was this man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine, but treated a clumsy bookstore clerk with unexpected kindness? After a few minutes, he stood up, pulling a sleek, black business card from his jacket pocket and placing it on the table beside her. "My name is Damien Roth," he said, his voice formal again. "I owe you an apology. I may have startled you when I walked in." Claire blinked, confused. "It wasn't your fault," she said. Still, he gave her a small nod, almost like a bow, and then, without another word, turned and walked out of the store, leaving the card and an air of quiet mystery behind him. Claire picked up the card, running her fingers over the embossed letters. She had no way of knowing then that this brief encounter would change her life completely, pulling her into a world of secrets, danger, and perhaps love. She tucked the card into her apron pocket, unaware that the first chapter of a new story had just begun. 3 days passed before Claire saw him again. It was late afternoon, and she was behind the counter at Whitmore's, updating the shop's inventory system while sipping lukewarm tea. Outside, the sky had dimmed with the threat of another spring storm. Customers were sparse, the soft hum of rain against the windows filling the quiet space. The doorbell chimed. Claire looked up and nearly dropped her cup. Damien Roth stood in the doorway, his dark trench coat dusted with raindrops, his hair slightly damp and tousled in a way that made him look less like a CEO and more like a man out of a novel. He scanned the room with purpose, his eyes locking on hers within seconds. "Miss Bennet," he said with the same calm, authoritative tone she remembered. Claire stood slowly, wary but curious. "Mr. Roth, you're back. I need to speak with you, privately." She blinked. "About my ankle? It's fine, really." He shook his head. "Not about that. May I?" He gestured toward the small reading nook near the back of the store, where an armchair and 2 wooden chairs sat under a hanging lamp. Reluctantly, Claire nodded. She followed him to the corner, heart racing though she didn't know why. He pulled out a chair for her, a gesture that surprised her again, then sat across from her, hands folded neatly on his lap. "I'm going to say something that will sound strange," he began. "I ask only that you listen until the end." Claire leaned back slightly. "You've definitely got my attention." He took a deep breath. "I need a wife." Claire stared at him. He held up a hand, anticipating her reaction. "Not a real wife, a fake one, just for 1 year." Claire blinked, twice. "You're joking." "I'm not. You want me to pretend to be your wife? For a year?" "Yes." She let out a short, stunned laugh. "That's the most absurd thing anyone has ever said to me." Damien didn't flinch. "It's a contractual arrangement. No real marriage, no intimacy, no legal entanglements, just appearances. You'll be compensated very well for your time, enough to eliminate your debt and start a new life if you choose." Claire stared at him. "Why me?" He looked at her carefully. "Because you're not part of my world. Because you're honest. You don't fawn over wealth, and you don't pretend to be something you're not. You're ordinary in the most grounding sense of the word. My family will never see you coming." Claire frowned. "That doesn't sound like a compliment." "It is," he said simply. She leaned forward, hands folded. "What's the catch?" "There's a condition in my father's will. A letter, one I can only open if I'm legally married for a full year. It's the key to understanding something important about his death. My family has hidden things from me, and I need to know the truth." Claire studied him. There was no arrogance in his eyes now, just a man driven by something deeper. Not greed, not pride, but maybe pain. She shook her head. "You want me to lie to your entire family, live with you, pretend to be your wife, smile at people I don't know, attend dinners and parties, and help you uncover some dark family mystery?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "And in return you'll pay off all my debts?" "Yes." Claire looked away. Her thoughts swirled like a storm. This man was serious. She didn't know how she felt about that. On one hand, the offer was insane. On the other, it was the first chance she had seen in years to escape her circumstances. "I'm not an actress," she said. "I don't need an actress. I need someone real, someone who doesn't crack under pressure, someone who can keep secrets." She exhaled slowly, then looked back at him. 1 year? 1 year, nothing more. "And after that, we walk away." Cleanly, she hesitated. "What if someone finds out?" "They won't, unless you tell them." "What about your mother?" He paused, then said quietly, "She doesn't know about the condition. She just thinks I finally agreed to settle down. She's not well, and if she suspects I'm lying, she might not recover." Claire's brows drew together. "So I'd be lying to a sick woman." "You'd be giving her peace," he said softly, "even if it's temporary." The silence between them stretched. Claire looked down at her hands. She thought about the past due notices in her mailbox, the unfinished manuscript under her bed, the dreams she kept shelving like dusty books, too afraid to reach for them. She looked up at Damien again. His face was calm, unreadable, but there was something else in his eyes, a silent urgency, a quiet desperation that echoed her own. "All right," she said at last. "I'll do it." His expression didn't change, but something in his shoulders eased. "One condition," she added. He raised an eyebrow. "No touching, no kisses, no fake intimacy unless it's absolutely necessary." He nodded. "Agreed. Also," she continued, "I keep my job at the bookstore. I need something that's still mine." "Understood." Claire leaned back, still unsure if she had made the biggest mistake of her life or the most daring decision yet. Damien stood and extended his hand. She hesitated, then shook it. It was official. They were strangers. They had nothing in common. And yet, in that moment, a silent contract formed between two lonely people with very different reasons, but one shared goal. They had no idea what was coming next. But the story had already begun. Claire arrived at Damien's residence on a Friday morning, suitcase in hand, nerves bundled tight in her stomach. The car he had sent was sleek and black, driven by a man in uniform who addressed her as Miss Bennet, with the kind of crisp professionalism she'd only seen in films. When they pulled into the private drive, Claire was speechless. The Roth estate was more than just a mansion. It was a fortress of glass and stone, perched on a quiet hill above the city, surrounded by meticulously trimmed hedges and tall iron gates, the kind of place that didn't just whisper wealth, it declared it. She stepped out onto the circular driveway, taking in the towering windows, the marble steps, the silence that felt almost sacred. A maid opened the door before she could knock. "Welcome, Miss Bennet. Mr. Roth is in his study." Claire followed the maid through hallways that seemed to stretch for miles, each one lined with art she couldn't even pretend to understand. Everything was spotless, symmetrical, cold. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum. Damien met her at the foot of the grand staircase. He was in a charcoal gray suit, crisp as ever, with not a strand of hair out of place. Claire suddenly felt self-conscious in her jeans and oversized sweater. "You're early," he said, not unkindly. "You said Friday morning," she replied. "I assumed you meant it." He gave a single nod, then turned. "Your room is on the second floor, west wing, third door on the right. You'll find the wardrobe has been stocked based on your sizes." Claire blinked. "How do you know my sizes?" He glanced at her. "I'm thorough." She bit back a comment and followed him up the stairs. Her room was beautiful, too beautiful. White and silver accents, a view of the city skyline, a walk-in closet the size of her old apartment. "This doesn't feel real," she muttered. "It isn't," he replied, already halfway down the hall. Later that evening, Claire wandered into the kitchen barefoot, hair tied up messily, wearing one of her favorite old t-shirts. She was hungry and hoped to find something simple like cereal or fruit. The kitchen, however, was another story. Everything was in perfect order. Stainless steel appliances gleamed. The spice rack looked untouched. Even the fruit bowl had only perfectly round apples. Claire opened the fridge and scanned its contents. No milk, only glass bottles of green juice and tightly sealed containers labeled with the day of the week. She muttered under her breath, "Do rich people not eat sandwiches?" Just then, a voice cut through the air. "What do you think you're doing?" Claire jumped and turned to see Damien standing in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his jacket, just a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked almost human, but the stern expression on his face erased that thought. "Looking for food," she said. "In the fridge, in the kitchen, where people usually store food." "You rearranged the bottles," he said flatly. Claire blinked. "I moved one bottle to reach the yogurt behind it." "That's not how the fridge is organized." Claire gaped at him. "Are you serious?" "I prefer order." She placed her hands on her hips. And I prefer not starving. Damien sighed and stepped into the room, fixing the bottle's position as if restoring the balance of the universe. Claire watched in disbelief. "This is going to be a long year," she muttered. "If you follow the rules," he said calmly. "It won't be." She narrowed her eyes. "Your rules. This is my house." She smirked. "Correction. It's our house. We're married, remember?" Damien didn't reply. Instead, he poured himself a glass of water and left without another word. Claire stared after him, both frustrated and slightly amused. Living with him was going to be like living with a robot. A rich, obsessive, compulsive robot with cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. The next few days followed a pattern. Claire tried to adjust to the cold structure of Damien's world. Every morning, he left at exactly 6:30. Every evening, he returned at 7. He read the Wall Street Journal during breakfast, never spoke more than a sentence, and answered emails while walking. She, meanwhile, did everything in her power to feel human in that house. She played music in the morning, much to his annoyance. She brought mismatched mugs into the pristine kitchen. Once, she even moved the throw pillows on the living room couch to sit more comfortably. "You have no respect for symmetry," he said one evening. "I have no respect for lifeless furniture," she replied. They clashed constantly, about the thermostat, about pantry labels, about her habit of leaving her shoes by the front door. But underneath the bickering, there was something else beginning to form. A strange, unspoken awareness, a silent recognition that despite how different they were now bound together. One evening, Claire came home from the bookstore later than usual. She kicked off her boots at the door, humming softly to herself, and turned the corner to find Damien sitting alone in the dark living room, sipping whiskey, staring at nothing. She paused. "Long day?" He didn't answer at first. Then he said, "They asked about you today." Claire stepped in slowly. "Who did?" "My board of directors. They're curious about my sudden marriage." She sat across from him, curling her legs underneath her. "What did you tell them?" "That you're smarter than most of them, and that you drink too much tea." Claire laughed softly. "That's oddly specific." "I don't lie," he said, his voice quieter now, "even when I should." She looked at him. For the first time since moving in, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't cold or calculating. She saw loneliness, the kind of loneliness that money couldn't touch. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one pretending. Claire had only been living in Damien's house for 2 weeks when the first real test of their arrangement arrived in the form of an elegant cream-colored envelope delivered by hand. It bore the Roth family crest and was sealed with real wax. Damien opened it without ceremony and handed it to her. "It's a family gathering," he said. "At the estate. My mother hosts it every year." Claire raised an eyebrow. "And I'm expected to attend?" He looked at her with a deadpan expression. "You're my wife." She stared at the invitation, heart thumping a little faster. A formal Roth family event meant high society, scrutiny, and possibly the very people Damien was trying to deceive. It also meant pretending to be in love with a man who barely smiled, let alone touched her. "I don't know how to act in front of your family," she admitted. Damien walked toward the window, his hands in his pockets. "You won't have to act. Just stay close to me, smile when needed, and let me lead." "That sounds like a hostage situation," she muttered. He turned back to her. "Claire, this is important. My mother may not trust easily, but if we pass her test, the rest of the family will follow." Claire took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, let's do it." On the evening of the event, Claire stood in front of the full-length mirror in the guest room, smoothing the navy blue dress that had been delivered earlier that day. It fit perfectly, simple yet elegant, with an open back and delicate embroidery along the waist. Her hair, curled softly over her shoulders, framed her face in a way she wasn't used to seeing. For a moment, she didn't recognize herself. Damien appeared at the doorway, dressed in a black tuxedo. He paused when he saw her. His eyes swept over her slowly, not with hunger, but with something else, surprise, maybe even admiration. It was the first time he looked at her like a woman, not a contract. "You look," he hesitated, then said quietly, "presentable." Claire narrowed her eyes. "Is that your version of a compliment?" He offered her his arm. "Let's go." They arrived at the Roth estate, a sprawling chateau in the countryside surrounded by manicured gardens and glowing lanterns. Valets opened the doors, guests in designer gowns and tailored suits flowed into the ballroom, and soft classical music drifted from a live quartet near the fountain. Damien kept Claire close, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. Every time someone approached, he introduced her with effortless charm. Claire smiled, nodded, and answered polite questions, but inside she was reeling. These people were powerful, cunning, and watching her like hawks. Then, the moment she had been dreading arrived. Margaret Roth entered the room. She was tall, regal, with silver hair pinned in a perfect twist and a gaze as sharp as crystal. Her presence alone made the room hush slightly. She approached them slowly, her heels echoing on the marble floor. Claire felt Damien's posture stiffen beside her. "Mother," he said with careful calm, "you look lovely tonight." Margaret's eyes moved to Claire. "And this must be the wife you didn't bother telling me about until after the ceremony." Claire extended her hand. "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Roth." Margaret didn't take the hand immediately. Her eyes searched Claire's face, her dress, even the way she stood. After a long, uncomfortable silence, she finally reached out and shook it. "You're different than I expected," she said. Claire smiled gently. "I get that a lot." Margaret's lips curled slightly, though whether it was amusement or disapproval was hard to tell. "We're having a family toast in 10 minutes. I expect you both to attend. And I'd love to see some real affection between you two. After all, you're newlyweds." With that, she turned and walked away. Claire turned to Damien in a panic. "What does she mean, real affection?" "She means we're not convincing enough," he muttered. "We need to prove it." Before she could respond, a distant relative strolled up and clapped Damien on the back. "So, when do we get to see the first kiss, cousin?" Claire choked on her breath. Damien's hand tightened slightly around her waist. The crowd was watching now. His mother, the board members, the vultures. Claire whispered, "Damien, no." He whispered back, "It's just for show." And before she could say another word, he turned to her, cupped her face gently with both hands, and kissed her. It wasn't a peck. It wasn't mechanical. It was soft, steady, and unnervingly warm. His lips pressed against hers with a surprising tenderness that made her heart stutter. Claire's eyes widened, then fluttered shut. For a moment the world melted away. The music blurred, the stairs vanished. It was just them. Two people pretending, caught in something that felt dangerously real. When he finally pulled away, applause erupted from the nearby guests. Claire blinked, dazed, unsure whether she should smile or slap him. They played the part all evening, arms linked, whispered laughter, polite touches. But when they got back to the car, Claire shoved his hand off hers. "What the hell was that?" "A convincing performance," he said simply. "You didn't warn me." "You would have overthought it." "You crossed a line," she snapped. Damien looked at her, unreadable. "So did you, when you kissed me back." Claire said nothing, because he was right, and that terrified her more than any kiss ever could. After the kiss at the family gathering, something shifted. Claire tried to pretend it hadn't happened, that it was just another part of the performance, but the truth was harder to silence than she expected. She found herself lying awake at night, replaying the moment, not because it was forced, but because it wasn't. Damien, for his part, returned to his routines. He was punctual, quiet, and seemingly unaffected. But Claire started noticing little things, small details he never paid attention to before, like the way her favorite tea brand appeared in the cupboard, or how he adjusted the thermostat a few degrees warmer when she worked late in the library room. He no longer complained when she played soft music in the morning. He didn't mention it at all. One morning, Claire wandered into the kitchen and found a fresh box of pastries on the counter. Inside were strawberry tarts, her favorite. She looked around, puzzled. The staff hadn't mentioned them, and they didn't come from the usual supplier. She turned and saw Damien reading the news on his tablet, seated at the kitchen island. "These are mine?" she asked, lifting one tart carefully. Without looking up, he said, "You mentioned you liked them last week." Claire stared at him. "You remembered?" "I remember everything that's relevant." She smiled faintly and took a bite, letting the sweetness linger longer than usual. "Well, thank you." He finally glanced at her, just briefly, but the look in his eyes stayed with her long after he returned to his tablet. Later that day, Claire was shelving books in the home office when she knocked over a photo frame. It hit the floor and cracked. She picked it up, heart pounding, and stared at the picture. Damien as a child, maybe 10 years old, standing beside his father. There was something in his face even then. That same guarded expression, the same stiffness, and his father's hand on his shoulder looked more like possession than affection. She placed the frame back gently. That night, she found him alone in the library, sitting by the fireplace with a glass of wine. "I didn't mean to break it," she said quietly. He looked up. "It doesn't matter. The glass can be replaced." "I saw your face," she added. "In the photo, you looked sad." He didn't respond right away. Then he said, "I didn't know what sadness was then. I only knew silence." Claire stepped closer. "That's not a way for a child to grow up." He studied her. "It made me efficient." "It made you lonely," she corrected gently. For a moment he didn't argue. They sat in silence after that, the fire crackling between them, and for the first time, Claire felt like she wasn't just pretending. She was beginning to understand him piece by piece. Days passed, and the awkward edges of their arrangement softened. Damien began asking her how her day was, not just out of politeness, but with interest. She found herself looking forward to their evening dinners, even when they barely spoke. Their silences were no longer cold, they were companionable. One afternoon, Claire got lost in the city while trying to find a rare bookstore. Her phone battery died, and a sudden downpour drenched her clothes. When she finally reached a public cafe and borrowed a charger, she saw several missed calls from Damien. When she returned home, he was pacing near the front door, his coat still on, tie loosened. "Where the hell have you been?" he snapped as soon as he saw her. Claire blinked, surprised by the intensity in his voice. "I got lost. My phone died. I'm fine." "You should have told someone where you were going." "I didn't think I needed permission to walk outside." He stepped forward, his hands clenched. "This isn't about permission. It's about not disappearing on me." Something in his voice broke, something real. Claire softened. "I didn't mean to worry you." He looked at her, eyes dark and unreadable. "You did." The silence that followed was thick. She stepped past him, her wet shoes squeaking against the marble. Then, without thinking, she paused and turned. "Would it have mattered last month?" she asked. He met her gaze. "No, he admitted, but it matters now. And just like that, the space between them changed again. That evening, Damien brought her a towel while she dried her hair. He didn't say anything. He just handed it to her, then walked away. But she saw the way his hand lingered at the edge of the doorframe, the way he hesitated, like he wanted to stay but didn't know how. Claire sat in bed later, rereading old journal entries, trying to remind herself that this wasn't real, that it had a deadline, that it had started as a business deal. But her heart didn't seem to care about any of that, and somewhere deep down she wondered if his didn't either. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when Damien received the call that changed everything. He had been in the middle of reviewing quarterly reports when his personal line buzzed. Only a few people had that number. The screen displayed a name he hadn't seen in years: Edward Roth. His uncle. Damien answered with a calm voice, but his pulse had already quickened. "I assume you've heard," Edward said without preamble. "Heard what?" "The old man's second will. The lawyer's office called. They found it." Damien stood slowly, the chair behind him sliding across the hardwood floor. "That's impossible. The first will was final." Edward chuckled coldly. "Apparently not. And there's more. It names you as sole heir. If you're married for a full calendar year. Sound familiar?" Damien's grip on the phone tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because there are others who won't be happy about it, and because your father didn't trust anyone, not even his own brother. That's why he left a letter. One only you can open. It's in the vault." Damien's mind spun. The vault. The letter. All these years he had believed the marriage clause was just a power play. But now he realized there was something his father had truly been hiding. Something big. After the call, Damien walked straight to the study and retrieved the key to the family vault from a drawer hidden behind a panel. Claire found him minutes later, coat already on, eyes distant. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To the Roth estate," he said. "There's something I need to read." She followed him out of instinct, sliding into the car beside him, though he hadn't asked. She could feel it in his silence. This wasn't about business. It was about something deeper, something personal. When they reached the estate, Damien walked with purposeful strides down the long marble hallway. He opened the vault and pulled out a sealed envelope marked in his father's handwriting. The sight of it made his throat tighten. He opened it slowly, hand steady, but heart heavy. Inside was a letter. "Damien, if you are reading this, then you followed my instructions. That alone tells me you're ready to know the truth. Your mother doesn't know everything about the night I died. I never intended to leave you the way I did. There are men in our family, in our company, who want more than money. They want silence, and they will do anything to keep it. I kept secrets to protect you. But now, it's your turn to decide how far you're willing to go to expose them. One name will give you everything you need. Marcus Elbridge. He's not just a partner. He's the reason I'm gone." Damien read the letter twice. Claire stepped closer, her voice low. "What does it say?" He folded it carefully. "It says my father didn't die by accident." Claire's eyes widened. "You think he was murdered?" "I think he was silenced." They drove home in silence, the air thick with new weight. That night Damien didn't eat. He barely spoke. He sat in the library staring into the fire, the letter in his hand. Claire sat across from him. "What will you do?" "I'll start with Elbridge," he said, "and then I'll deal with the rest." The next morning, Claire came down to the living room and stopped in her tracks. A woman was standing by the fireplace, tall, poised, with honey blonde hair cascading over one shoulder and striking blue eyes that glinted like glass. She was dressed in a designer coat, heels too high for comfort, and a smirk that could cut diamonds. Claire didn't need to ask who she was. "Lena," Damien said, behind her, his voice clipped. "What are you doing here? Lena turned, her expression melting into mock innocence. I was in the neighborhood, thought I'd drop by and see how marriage suits you. Claire folded her arms. You should have called. Lena looked her up and down. And miss the surprise? I wanted to see the woman who managed to tame Damien Roth, though, I have to say, you're not what I expected. Claire smiled tightly. Funny. I could say the same about you. Damien stepped between them. That's enough. Lena tilted her head. Relax, I'm just visiting. No harm done. Unless, of course, I struck a nerve. Claire turned to leave, but Lena's voice followed her. Tell me, Claire, does he still shut the world out at night, or are you the one exception? Claire didn't respond. She walked upstairs, heart pounding, not from jealousy, but from fear. Not fear of Lena, but fear of what Lena represented. The part of Damien's life she would never fully understand. The woman who had known him before the contract, before Claire became part of the story. That night, Claire sat in bed, knees tucked under her chin, staring at the wall. When Damien came in, she didn't look at him. You could have warned me, she said. I didn't know she was coming. She still loves you. She left me, he said. And when she did, I stopped caring. Claire finally turned. But you let her in. You let her talk to me like that. Damien's jaw tightened. I didn't expect her to push. Well, she did. And you stood there. They stared at each other across the room. Distance had crept in, the kind that couldn't be measured in feet. You're not just pretending anymore, she said quietly, but you're still hiding. He didn't deny it, and Claire felt the first crack in her heart. Because pretending was one thing, but being invisible, that was something else entirely. The following days passed like slow-moving storms, heavy with silence and unspoken words. Claire kept her distance, throwing herself into work at the bookstore and spending long hours reorganizing the already perfect shelves at home. Damien noticed. Of course he did, but he said nothing. He simply watched as the woman who had once filled his home with warmth began to withdraw into a shell he could not reach. One evening, Claire returned late to find Damien in the study surrounded by files, papers spread out across the mahogany desk. He looked up as she entered, but the greeting in his eyes was hesitant, uncertain. Claire set her bag down carefully by the door, the weight in her chest growing heavier by the minute. You're working late, she said, her voice too light to be real. I'm close to uncovering something, he replied, then added after a pause. I want you to stay, I mean, here, tonight, with me. Claire's heart twisted painfully, not because she did not want to stay, but because she knew staying would only make leaving harder. Damien, she began, but he cut her off, standing abruptly. Is it because of Lena? He demanded, tension sparking in the air. Claire flinched, not at his tone, but at how easily he had read her. She forced herself to meet his gaze. It's not just her, she said quietly. It's everything. The contract, the lies, pretending every day that this is real when it's not. Damien moved closer, frustration etched into every line of his face. It was real for me, he said. Claire swallowed hard. Then why didn't you tell me about the investigation? About what you found in your father's letter? Why did you let me stand there in front of Lena like I was nothing? Damien opened his mouth, but no words came out, because deep down he knew she was right. He had let fear rule him, fear of needing someone, fear of losing control. Claire stepped back, putting distance between them, the ache in her chest almost unbearable. I can't do this, she said, her voice trembling. I can't live like I'm invisible. I deserve more than a contract, Damien. I deserve more than a shadow of love. He reached out as if to stop her, but she shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. You said once that you don't lie, she whispered. Then tell me the truth. Did you ever love me, or was I just part of the plan? Damien hesitated, just a breath too long, and that hesitation broke her heart. Claire gave a sad little smile, the kind that hurt more than tears. "That's all I needed to know," she said. Without another word, she turned and left the study, her footsteps soft against the marble floors. Damien stood frozen, the weight of her absence already filling the space she left behind. The next morning, Claire packed her things quietly. She left the engagement ring on the nightstand, its cold gleam catching the morning light. She didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to say. When Damien found the empty room hours later, a strange emptiness gripped him, a silence deeper than any he had ever known. He picked up the ring, feeling its weight against his palm, and for the first time in years, he sat down heavily in the chair by the window and let himself feel the loss. It was not supposed to end this way. He told himself that, again and again. This was supposed to be simple, clean, professional, no emotions, no attachments. But somewhere along the way, Claire had become more than a contract, more than an obligation. She had become the only thing that made the house feel like a home. Damien spent the next few days in a haze, going through the motions of meetings and phone calls without really being present. The only thing that mattered now was gone, and he had no one to blame but himself. Late one night, driven by desperation, he called her, but the line went straight to voicemail. He sent messages, long and short, apologetic and pleading, but none were answered. Finally, he reached out to her landlord at the bookstore, only to learn that Claire had resigned and moved out without leaving a forwarding address. She was gone, really gone, and Damien Roth, who had conquered boardrooms and enemies alike, realized that he was powerless in the only battle that truly mattered, the battle for her heart. He stood at the window of the penthouse one evening, looking out over the city lights, remembering how Claire used to curl up on the couch with a book, how she laughed at his grumpiness, how she challenged him to live, really live, not just exist. Damien pressed a hand against the cold glass and made a silent vow. He would find her. He would tell her everything he should have said, because for the first time in his life, he understood love was not a weakness. It was the only thing that made the fight worth it, and he was not about to give up without a battle. Damien's transformation began quietly, not with grand declarations, but with decisions that stripped away the version of himself he had spent years building. The first thing he did was call a press conference, not for the company, but for himself. In front of cameras and reporters who expected another clinical corporate update, he announced his resignation as CEO of Roth Industries effective immediately. The room erupted in confusion, but Damien stood firm, his voice steady as he spoke of family, responsibility, and the weight of silence that had haunted his father's legacy. He mentioned the investigation, the secret letter, and the name Marcus Elbridge. And, though he left many questions unanswered, one thing was clear to everyone watching. Damien Roth was no longer hiding behind boardroom walls. He spent the next week working with a private investigator to finish what his father had started. It was no longer about money or power. It was about the truth his father had died protecting, the truth Damien had ignored for too long. But even as he uncovered more about the betrayal within his family, his mind kept drifting back to Claire, her laughter, her stubbornness, the way she used to leave notes on the fridge just to annoy him. The house without her was unbearable, too quiet, too clean, too empty. He visited the bookstore, but it was under new management. The apartment above it was already rented. He called every number she had ever mentioned, tracked every place she had spoken fondly of, and finally, 2 weeks later, he got a letter. Former co-worker mentioned Claire had talked about a small coastal town she loved, a place she used to visit as a child where her grandmother once lived. The name stuck with him, Maple Cove. Without hesitating, Damien packed a bag, drove himself for hours, and arrived in the quiet town just as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was nothing like the world he knew. No glass towers, no luxury cars, just ocean air and small shops and winding roads that made him feel strangely out of place. He asked around with a photo in hand and eventually found someone who recognized her, A young barista at a beachside cafe smiled and pointed toward a little white cottage at the edge of town. "She walks along the shore in the mornings," the girl said, always with a notebook. Damien stood outside the cottage the next day, heart pounding in a way he wasn't used to. He was nervous, not about being rejected, but about not being forgiven. He had rehearsed a dozen speeches, but none felt right, so he waited. And just after sunrise, he saw her. Claire walked barefoot along the water's edge, her hair tied up, wearing a soft sweater and loose jeans, notebook clutched in her hand. She looked peaceful, radiant, free. He stepped onto the sand, each step deliberate, careful not to frighten her. She saw him from a distance and froze. For a long moment neither of them moved, the waves crashing softly behind them, seagulls crying overhead. Then she took a cautious step forward. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice calm but guarded. Damien swallowed hard. "I came to tell you the truth," he said. "No scripts, no contracts, just the truth." She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "I stepped down from the company," he continued. "I finished the investigation. Marcus Elbridge is being charged, the board is being rebuilt, and my father's name is being cleared." Claire's eyes softened slightly, but she still kept her distance. "And you came all this way to tell me that?" Damien shook his head slowly. "I came all this way to tell you I'm sorry, for lying, for shutting you out, for not saying the things I should have said when you needed to hear them." Claire looked away, her fingers tightening around the notebook. "And what would you say now?" she asked. He stepped closer, stopping just a breath away. "I'd say, I love you," he said quietly. "Not because of a contract, not because of timing or obligation, but because I don't know how to breathe without you anymore." She blinked, the sea breeze lifting strands of her hair across her face. "You really gave everything up?" "Yes," he said, "and I'd do it again if it meant having one more chance with you." Claire searched his face, not for words, but for sincerity, and for the first time she saw no walls, no calculation, just a man who had finally learned how to feel. She closed her notebook and let out a soft breath. "You broke my heart, Damien." "I know," he said. "Let me earn it back. No more pretending, no more disappearing, just us, if you'll let me." The silence that followed stretched for miles, but then Claire did something that made his heart leap. She smiled, just a little. "You owe me pastries," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Damien laughed, relief flooding his face. "I'll bring a box every morning if that's what it takes." Claire stepped forward, placing her hand over his heart. "Start with one," she said, "and we'll see." And just like that, the tide began to turn. The morning sun spilled golden light over Maple Cove as Claire and Damien walked side by side along the narrow path leading back to her cottage. The world around them felt quieter somehow, as if even nature was holding its breath. Claire glanced sideways at him, still not fully believing he was here, still not fully believing he meant it. Inside the cottage, Damien sat awkwardly on the edge of her worn sofa, while Claire brewed coffee in the tiny kitchen. He looked so out of place, all broad shoulders and sharp lines against the cozy clutter. And yet there was something softer about him now, something real. She handed him a mug and sat across from him, waiting. Damien cleared his throat. "I thought I knew what strength was," he said, his voice low. "I thought it meant control, distance, winning every battle. But it was never about that. Strength is letting someone in even when you are terrified they might break you." Claire held the mug tighter in her hands, the heat grounding her. "I love you," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "I loved you when you rearranged my perfect kitchen. I loved you when you sang off key in the mornings. I loved you even when I was too proud and too blind to admit it." Tears welled in Claire's eyes, but she didn't look away. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight," he said, "but I want to build something real with you. No contracts, no conditions, just us." The simplicity of his words broke something open inside her. The wall she'd built around her heart crumbled quietly, not with grand gestures, but with the steady truth in his voice. Claire set her mug down carefully and crossed the room. She knelt in front of him, took his hand in hers, and smiled through her tears. "I never needed perfection, Damien," she whispered. "I just needed you." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her like he never wanted to let go again, and for the first time there were no doubts between them, no distance, just two broken hearts finding their way back to each other. A few months later, under a sky painted with stars and the soft whisper of ocean waves, Claire and Damien stood barefoot on the beach, exchanging vows. No guests, no spectacle, just them and the promises they meant with every beat of their hearts. When Damien slid the simple silver band onto Claire's finger, he leaned close and whispered, "No more contracts." Claire smiled through happy tears and replied, "Only forever." And as he kissed her, slow and deep, the waves applauded at their feet, and the future stretched out before them, not perfect, not predictable, but beautifully, unmistakably real. Because sometimes love does not come crashing in with thunder. Sometimes it grows quietly, steadily, through every fight, every mistake, every impossible choice. And when it finally takes root, it is unshakable, just like theirs.